Last week's presidential immunity ruling by the Leonard Leo-appointed Supreme Court conservative majority all but put a nail in the coffin of the efforts to hold Donald Trump accountable for his many alleged crimes before November's election. The federal election interference case won't be returned back to D.C. Circuit Court Judge Tanya Chutkan until next month, when the Supreme Court officially issues its judgment in the immunity case. At that point, Judge Chutkan would need to parse through what parts of the indictment could still be charged against Trump, and that would likely require evidentiary hearings to be held. That would be the last opportunity before the election for Jack Smith to make public any of the damning evidence against Trump, including the possibility of having high-profile officials like Trump's former vice president, Mike Pence, testify at the hearings. The Guardian reports that Trump's team is already preparing to fight to stop such hearings from occurring. According to The Guardian, in the coming months, Trump's lawyers are expected to argue that the judge can decide whether the conduct is immune based on legal arguments alone. If prosecutors try to call Pence or his chief of staff, Mark Short, to testify about meetings where Trump discussed stopping the January 6th certification, Trump would try to block that testimony by asserting executive privilege and having Pence assert the speech or debate clause protection. Joining me now is Melissa Murray, NYU law professor, MSNBC legal analyst, and co-host of the Strict Scrutiny podcast. Melissa, good to see you. So what are the chances that Trump's lawyers can once again delay this? Because this hearing could be the only way the American people could hear from Mike Pence. Is it possible that they can stop it?
I don't know if it's possible to stop it, but that's never been the goal. The goal, Joy, has always been to delay as long as possible. My co-author of the Trump indictments, Andrew Weissman, has said on many an MSNBC program that this particular evidentiary hearing might be the only opportunity for the American public to have a full understanding of the evidence against Donald Trump. Like, by having this evidentiary hearing, it might be the closest thing we can get to a trial by jury. And I think that's the last thing that Donald Trump would like to see. So here we have this move to get Judge Chutkan to decide this on the papers, to not hold any kind of hearing, and to keep this evidence out of the public domain. How do we stop this case from going back to the Supreme Court? Because I feel like their best shot would be to somehow appeal her attempt to hold the evidentiary hearing and somehow get it back into the hands of the pro-insurrectionist majority on the court. Because if they did that, we already know that whether it's John Roberts or Alito or Thomas, they'll shut it down. So it's a really interesting question. I mean, obviously, all roads do lead back to the Supreme Court. There would be a hearing before Judge Chutkan about whether or not the hearing could happen. That could be appealed onto the D.C. Circuit, and then any decision from the D.C. Circuit could be appealed to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, however, does not have to take this. And again, so many Americans are up in arms about this immunity decision. 75% of Americans don't believe that the president should have complete immunity from criminal prosecution. And they worry that although the court has not given the president complete immunity, it has opened a quite wide door to the president having immunity from criminal liability in the future. And they are understandably upset about it. And so I wonder if the court, which has to rely on public opinion to some degree for its own legitimacy, might think twice about taking up this case and handing another win to Donald Trump. But the delay is really where all of the action is. I believe it is the chances that they would take the case and protect him again are 100%. I don't think they care at all. I mean, this is my opinion. I don't think they care at all. I think they've shown in the way that they write and even the way they respond to the dissents. John Roberts and them don't care. They want Trump back in, and they don't care what they have to do. Real quickly, on the case about him stealing classified documents that we know that Aileen Cannon is trying to help him out, is there some way that the concurrence written by Clarence Thomas could give her a leg to stand on to dismiss that case? Oh, I think that concurrence is written entirely for an audience of one, and that one was Judge Cannon. That concurrence by Justice Clarence Thomas, which no one else on the court joined, essentially raised questions about the constitutionality of the appointment of the special counsel. This was something that Judge Cannon had already questioned and had an open hearing on in her courtroom just weeks before. This only fuels that fire. And so, again, I think it was tailor-made for Judge Cannon. Others may disagree, but I think it will certainly stoke the flames of this particular argument. If, to just circle right back again to the Chutkan case, if that hearing does happen,
who would you, as a legal professional, most want to hear from? Would it be Mike Pence? Like, who would you most want to hear from in that hearing?
Well, I think, again, it's the panoply of evidence that's really going to be important here. I'm not sure that any one particular witness or any one particular piece of evidence is going to be determinative or dispositive, but the entire tableau might be. But I do think the evidence from former Vice President Mike Pence about what happened on that day, how he was pressured to delay the certification or to reject the certification of the Electoral College would be really important. Whether that evidence could come out, we've talked about all of the different legal theories for preventing it, would be a problem.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I would love to hear from him. It would be very interesting. Melissa Murray, thank you very much. Much appreciated. But we begin tonight with Project 2025 and the Republican plan to impose repressive measures on every single one of us. Now, we talk a lot about this looming threat from Project 2025 on this show, but tonight, we're going to start laying out exactly what these people have in mind for you, your families, your friends, and your children, starting with their plans for the Department of Education, a federal department that Republicans have hated ever since it was created by President Jimmy Carter.
President Carter today signed into law a bill establishing a new federal department. It's the Department of Education, something he had promised in his 1976 election campaign. It will be the 13th cabinet-level agency of the government. It will take over 150 or more educational programs now in the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare.
Republicans despise the Department of Education for a number of reasons. One reason, it's easier to sell terrible Republican policies to a compliant public that's not getting a quality education from a weakened public school system. Another reason is the department's mission to foster equal access to education by prohibiting discrimination and ensuring equal access. That runs counter to what Christian nationalists want, which is de facto segregation. Now, before I go any further, you have to remember that after the Supreme Court banned school segregation in 1954, not everyone, including people like Bull Connor, the Commissioner of Public Safety for Birmingham, Alabama, just rolled over and accepted that ban. In fact, they threatened to shut the schools down rather than integrate them. And scores of white families who didn't like the idea of their kids commingling with black kids began to flee whatever schools were forcibly integrated en masse, leaving schools like the high school famously integrated in Little Rock, Arkansas, almost 100% black. This white flight birthed the Christian right movement and fueled their push to create private, sometimes church-sponsored schools that became taxpayer-funded private schools imposing religious doctrines to a select class of typically middle-class or upper-class white students. These were more commonly known as segregation academies. And they became really common because the federal government helped enforce strict plans like busing and denying tax-free status to whites-only schools to continue combating segregation, which brings us to today. It's important to understand what the Department of Education does for you and your kids. Among the things it does is student lending, Pell Grants, something called IDEA, which is basically federal funding for families with children with disabilities, and Title I, which is funding used solely to ensure that all kids, regardless of income, can acquire a quality education. And they keep civil rights data on things like the levels of racial integration in schools. All of that is in danger. Trump's henchmen want to eliminate the Department of Education. They want to create block grants to funnel tax dollars to private and religious schools to basically make white flight a taxpayer-funded benefit. They want to scale back enforcement of civil rights laws like Title IX, which prohibits gender-based discrimination. They want to enact a Parents' Bill of Rights modeled on Moms for Liberty, the book banning group. They want to take federal funding away from schools with curricula, books, or classes that address race, racism, gender, and sexuality. They want to eliminate school administrator positions that oversee DEI initiatives, resurrect the discredited 1776 Commission with the single goal of restoring, quote unquote, patriotic education in schools, North Korea style. Far more sinister is what's buried deep within Project 2025, which any person who sends their child to public school should care about. They want to mandate that all students in schools receiving federal funding must complete the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery. In plain English, that's a military entrance exam. You heard me right. They want to require your kids to take a military entrance exam. If you flip to page 134 of the 900-page Project 2025 manifesto, you'll read this proposal, and I quote, "To improve military recruiters' access to secondary schools and require the completion of the Armed Services and Vocational Aptitude Battery, the military entrance examination, by all students in schools that receive federal funding." And guess who would be exempt from that requirement, since they don't get federal funds? Private school kids. You feel me now? Look, my kids are grown adults. But do you feel comfortable having your babies handed over to the military-industrial complex so King Trump can use and discard them like old shell casings? Maybe sign them up to use on American streets to shoot protesters, because he's promised to do that. Or use them to round up brown migrants, to herd them off to the deportation camps that he's promised to build, or fight in his migrant fight club, or fight in some random war he starts to help out his friend Vladimir Putin or Kim Jong-un or whatever other madness he dreams up. Now, of course, Trump never mentions any of this because it's not exactly politically popular to tell the world you want to take money from poorer kids who want to go to college and take grants away from kids with disabilities and promote an education system styled on communist systems like North Korea, China, and Russia, or make school kids take a military entrance exam while letting the kids in segregation academies slide. But that's exactly what Trump and his Project 2025 friends want to do. Joining me now is Judd Legum, author of Public Information, and Megan Uzel, Director of Strategic Initiatives and External Affairs for Democracy Forward. Thank you both for being here. Megan, I do want to start with you because Democracy Forward is doing a great service to America by creating something online that people can use to go through Project 2025 themselves. Can you just talk about that a little bit? You call it the People's Guide to Project 2025. Please talk about it, and then talk about anything I've missed, or if you want to add anything to what I've described as their plans for education.
Thank you, Joy, very much. That's right. Democracy Forward has put together the People's Guide to Project 2025. Not everyone has to go read all 900 pages of it. We've done that for them. But what it really does is show and make accessible all of the great harms and threats to democracy that are contained in the extremist playbook. I mean, to be clear, Project 2025 is an existential threat to our democracy. And with regard to public education, all of the you laid it out so well in your introduction. The attacks that are contained in Project 2025 are designed to fundamentally disrupt and dismantle public education in our country as we know it. Public education is so core and fundamental to our nation's democracy. And I have the great fortune of being able to work with communities, families, students, teachers in states and cities across the country, where they're on the front lines of some of these, horrific ideas, and seeing firsthand the harms that are being, perpetuated in these communities, and then knowing that Project 2025 is really Moms for Liberty on steroids. Let's be clear. The people behind Project 2025 aren't seeking just to undermine public education. They're seeking to undermine our democracy, delegitimize, defund public education, roll back protections for marginalized groups, reduce funding for low-income students, expand school privatization, and ultimately eradicate the Department of Education. And that is something that will really hurt all of the students across the country, and people should be very worried about that.
Yeah, and Judd, the pretense right now, the trick that Donald Trump is trying to play on all of us is to say, well, I don't know anything about that. Those people don't have anything to do with me. I mean, that's obviously something that rhymes with pull quit. But talk about that a little bit, because these are his people, right?
Yeah, and I probably believe the fact that Donald Trump hasn't read this 920-page document. But, of course, that's the point. He is not a policy wonk. But if you look through, and in my newsletter, we did this, each individual author and the editors of each chapter, 31 of the 38 key authors and editors were members of his first administration, and the others are key outside allies. So what's going to happen, just like it happened in the first administration, if Donald Trump were to win, is that he may not be keying in on every single proposal within Project 2025, but these people will be back in those positions, and these proposals will be implemented because Trump is not focused on policy, he is focused on power. And that's why the document itself, whether or not Trump is familiar with each word, is very important, because it does represent the goals of the people who are aligned with Trump, who are deeply committed to enacting some of these policies, which are extremely radical.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Grover Norquist once said that they don't care, whether the Republican president that they would like to have in office is, brilliant, intelligent, or knows anything about the tax policies he wants to put in. He just needs to have 5 working digits to sign the bills. And the Project 2025 people are like, well, we're the smart people. We're going to come up with all the plans, just like we came up with the list of Supreme Court nominees for every Republican president. He just has to implement and sign the bills. He'll play golf most of the time. Megan, let's go through, because we need, just to go back to the Department of Education and how important it is. As of present, 49.4 million American children are in public schools. 5.5 million are in private schools. There are 95,577 public schools in America and 30,492 private schools. This is lots and lots and lots of American children who would be impacted if you got rid of the Department of Education. You're talking about Pell Grants. You're talking about kids not being able to get basic money for college. You're already seeing states implement their own versions of Project 2025. Alaska, Idaho, Utah, Wyoming, South Dakota, Iowa, Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, South Carolina, and Vermont have already rejected school summer food programs. They're already saying we don't want to feed kids in school. Nebraska initially rejected it. So this is already being implemented, right? School voucher programs are being rolled out in states, red states across the country: Iowa, Indiana, Ohio, West Virginia, North Carolina.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn. MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.